Two men, both with credentials most scientists spend entire careers pursuing. One is a retired Rear Admiral and former acting administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The other is the longest-serving chair of Harvard's Department of Astronomy. Both say they take the question of non-human intelligence seriously, and yet they have arrived at fundamentally different positions on what constitutes proof and what the evidence actually shows. This isn't a debate between believers and skeptics. That framing is dead. What's emerging is something more consequential, a methodological fracture among serious credentialed figures over how to evaluate UAP evidence in an era of deepfakes, classification barriers, and institutional distrust. The question is no longer whether scientists should engage with the UAP topic. They already are. The question is whether they can agree on the rules of engagement. Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet retired from the United States Navy after a 32-year career. He holds a PhD in oceanography from Scripps Institution of Oceanography and served as the acting head of NOAA under the Trump administration. His security clearances and institutional access are not in question. Beginning in late 2023 and escalating through 2024, Gallaudet made a series of extraordinary public statements. At the Sol Foundation's November 2023 symposium in San Francisco, and in subsequent interviews throughout 2024, he stated, directly and without hedging, that the United States government has recovered craft of non-human origin. In a June 2024 written statement, he declared, quote, "I am certain that the US has recovered technology from non-human intelligence," end quote. He didn't frame this as speculation. He framed it as knowledge. Knowledge informed, he says, by conversations with individuals inside legacy UAP programs and by encounters during his own military career, including the now famous 2015 USS Roosevelt Gimbal incident timeframe, during which he was a flag officer in the Navy. Avi Loeb approaches the problem from the opposite direction. As head of Harvard's Galileo project, a systematic, instrument-based effort to detect anomalous aerial phenomena, Loeb has positioned himself as the field's most prominent advocate for open, reproducible science. He has arguably done more than any academic to make UAP research respectable within university settings. But by mid-2024, Loeb began raising a concern that cut against the grain of the disclosure community. In interviews and public writings, he warned that the proliferation of AI-generated deepfakes poses an existential challenge to UAP evidence evaluation. In a July 2024 Medium essay, he wrote that the scientific community must develop rigorous verification frameworks, arguing that, quote, "extraordinary evidence must be distinguishable from extraordinary fabrication," end quote. Loeb has been careful not to dismiss whistleblower testimony outright, but his insistence on instrument-derived, peer-reviewed physical evidence creates a standard that most disclosure claims, including Gallaudet's, cannot currently meet in the public domain. The data, if it exists, remains classified. Here's where the divide becomes structural, not personal. Gallaudet's claims rest on what epistemologists call testimony-based evidence, knowledge derived from trusted sources within classified environments. He is essentially asking the public to extend the chain of trust from cleared insiders through him to us. His rank and career are the collateral. Loeb's framework demands instrument-based evidence, sensor data, physical samples, reproducible measurements. In the Galileo project's own words, their goal is to collect UAP data using, quote, "state-of-the-art scientific instruments that produce results accessible to the entire scientific community." Neither approach is inherently illegitimate. Courts of law rely on testimony daily. Particle physics relies on instruments. But in the UAP space, these two epistemological traditions are talking past each other. Gallaudet's certainty is unfalsifiable without declassification. Loeb's standards may be unmeetable if the most compelling evidence is locked behind security clearances that even members of Congress have struggled to access. As the ongoing battles over SIF access throughout 2024 demonstrated, it's worth examining what Loeb's approach has actually produced. The Galileo project's first observatory system, deployed atop the Harvard College Observatory, uses an array of cameras, radar units, audio sensors, and environmental monitors to capture comprehensive data on anything crossing its field of view. In a preliminary 2024 report, the team catalogued hundreds of detected objects, the vast majority of which were identifiable as drones, aircraft, satellites, or birds. A small percentage remained unresolved, but unresolved is not the same as anomalous. Loeb himself has emphasized this distinction repeatedly. The project's rigor is both its strength and its constraint. By the time an object is filtered through the Galileo pipeline, the bar for genuinely anomalous is extraordinarily high. Critics within the UAP research community have suggested this approach may be structurally incapable of detecting phenomena that are, by reported nature, transient, sensor-evading, and non-repeatable. Loeb has acknowledged the challenge, but maintains that the alternative, accepting unverifiable testimony, is worse for science in the long run. This scientific divide is playing out against a legislative backdrop that has itself become a battleground. The UAP Disclosure Act, originally championed by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Mike Rounds, and introduced in its first form in July 2023, sought to establish an independent review board with eminent domain authority over recovered materials. The act was substantially weakened during the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act negotiations, with key provisions stripped under pressure from what multiple legislators publicly described as defense industry opposition. Representative Tim Burchett stated bluntly in a December 2024 interview that, quote, "Certain contractors do not want this material seeing the light of day. What remained was a framework for further study, but not the declassification mechanism that could, in theory, bridge the gap between Gallaudet's testimony and Loeb's evidentiary standards. If the recovered materials exist, Congress has not yet secured the authority to move them into the public domain. The very evidence that could resolve the scientific debate remains, for now, legally inaccessible. Loeb's deepfake concern deserves its own examination because it strikes at something broader than UAP. We are entering a period in which video evidence, the currency of UAP research for decades, is becoming fundamentally unreliable. Generative AI tools available to anyone with a laptop can now produce UAP footage indistinguishable from authentic recordings at casual inspection. This has already had material effects. Multiple viral UAP videos circulated in 2024 were subsequently identified as AI-generated, including several that initially deceived experienced analysts. The so-called jellyfish UAP video from a forward operating base in Iraq, which went viral in January 2024 through journalist Jeremy Corbell, sparked weeks of heated debate over authenticity before provenance details were more fully established. Loeb's argument is that this environment makes instrument-based detection, with full chain of custody metadata, calibrated sensors, and simultaneous multimodal capture, not just preferable, but necessary. Without it, he contends, the field will drown in noise. But Gallaudet is not operating in isolation. His claims exist within a growing ecosystem of credentialed individuals saying essentially the same thing. David Grusch, the former intelligence official whose July 2023 congressional testimony triggered the current wave of disclosure pressure, made allegations of recovered craft and biologics that the intelligence community inspector general found, quote, credible and urgent. Colonel Carl Nell, a retired Army officer and former member of the UAP task force, stated publicly at the Seoul Foundation Symposium in 2023 that non-human intelligence is interacting with humanity, and that this is, in his words, a fact. The accumulation of testimony from individuals with verified clearances and verified access creates its own form of evidence, not scientific in Loeb's sense, but not dismissible either. At some point, the sheer number of corroborating witnesses with top-secret or above clearances forces a question. What standard of testimony would be sufficient, if not this? The Gallaudet-Loeb divide is not really about whether aliens exist. It's about what counts as knowledge, who gets to define it, and what happens when the normal mechanisms of scientific verification, replication, peer review, open data, are disrupted by national security classification. Loeb is right that science cannot function on trust alone. Gallaudet is right that classification creates an asymmetry where the people with the most knowledge are the least able to share it. Both positions are internally consistent, both are limited, and neither can resolve the impasse without action from a third party, namely the United States government. This is the paradox at the heart of modern UAP discourse. The scientific community is being asked to evaluate claims about evidence it cannot see, using methods designed for evidence that is freely available. Until that structural contradiction is resolved through declassification, controlled disclosure, or the kind of independent verification authority the UAP Disclosure Act originally envisioned, the divide will persist, and credentialed people on both sides will continue talking past each other, not because they disagree about the importance of truth, but because they inhabit fundamentally different information environments. The next 12 months may determine which framework prevails, or whether a synthesis emerges. The Galileo project is expanding its sensor network. Congressional pressure for declassification continues, with the newly reconstituted Senate Select Committee on Intelligence expected to hold further hearings in 2025. And the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO, continues its historical review under a cloud of credibility questions, particularly after its 2024 report was criticized by multiple whistleblowers and legislators as incomplete. If even a fraction of what Gallaudet, Grusch, and Nell have alleged is accurate, the evidentiary landscape will eventually shift, not through testimony, but through the material itself entering the public domain. If it doesn't, Loeb's instrument-first approach may be the only path forward. Either way, the scientific community's engagement with this topic has crossed a threshold. The debate is no longer whether to look, it's how to see.